The voice tore through the fog like a crack of thunder. "Get on your knees, General. I said on your damn knees, now!" Officer Harlan Cole's hand shook as he leveled his Glock at the woman in dress blues. His breath came short, his eyes locked on the 4 stars across her shoulders. Around him, the quiet bluffside cemetery overlooking the Pacific froze. Soldiers, mourners, and family turned in disbelief as the weapon pointed not at a threat, but at a mother in uniform standing before her son's casket. The flag draped over the coffin fluttered in the wind, and the echo of his command clung to the mist. General Maya Rivera stood tall, despite the damp chill biting her skin. Her uniform was immaculate, every medal polished, her white gloves clasped as if prayer alone could hold her together. She had buried soldiers before, men she had led through hell and sand, but never her own blood. Julian's flag-draped casket rested before her, a folded triangle waiting to be handed to no one, because she had already buried half of herself years earlier in Baghdad. Her sister Isabel stood behind her, whispering a hymn under her breath. Major Victor Lang, grayer now, hands trembling, looked down at his cane. He had carried Maya through an explosion in Iraq once, and now he carried the silence of knowing he could not carry her through this. The chaplain's voice was low, barely cutting through the sound of the sea against the bluffs. "Sergeant Julian Rivera, United States Army, Bronze Star for valor." Then came the gravel crunch of tires. A police cruiser stopped behind the row of military vans. Out stepped Harlan Cole, broad frame, sunburned face, bitterness carved deep into his jaw. His hand rested on his belt as he scanned the crowd. He was not here for security. He was here for her. Maya noticed him only when the uniformed guard whispered, "Ma'am, local law enforcement checking the perimeter." She turned slightly, polite, formal, appreciated. That was when she saw his name tag, Cole. The past hit like recoil. Years earlier, she had court-martialed him for calling a black soldier a monkey in uniform. She had stripped his rank, his pension, his pride. Now he was looking at her like a ghost come back to finish what war had not. His boots thudded against the gravel. "Still hiding behind those stars, General." His voice was laced with mock respect, the kind that smelled of whiskey and long-held hate. Maya did not move. "Officer Cole, this is a military funeral. Step back." He smirked. "You think your stars mean anything out here?" Isabel whispered. "Maya, ignore him." But the moment was already unraveling. Cole's hand dropped to his holster. The crowd gasped. "Don't," Victor said sharply, taking a step. But the snap of leather was already there. The metallic draw, followed by that hollow, chilling click of a safety released. The gun was pointed straight at her chest. On your knees, General. For a moment she did not breathe. The faces around her blurred. Mourners frozen between disbelief and terror. A little boy in a miniature army cap started to cry. The chaplain raised his hands. Victor lunged forward. "Harlan, stop!" The crack of the warning shot ripped the air apart. The sound bounced off the white tombstones, rolled down toward the ocean, and vanished into the fog. A shell casing spun across the gravel, glinting gold against gray. Children screamed. Soldiers ducked by instinct. The flag over Julian's casket fluttered violently, corner lifting like a hand reaching toward heaven. Maya did not fall. She lowered herself slowly to her knees, eyes locked on the coffin. Her voice was calm, almost detached. "You've done enough damage in this life, officer." Cole's breath came heavy. "You think you're untouchable. You ruined my life. Now I'll ruin yours." From the corner of the bluff, a young veteran named Mateo Santos was filming the funeral for his local veterans page. His phone trembled as he zoomed in. "This can't be happening," he muttered. The live stream began to climb. Thousands, then hundreds of thousands. Maya's heartbeat slowed, the way it used to before a firefight. The fog thickened. The gun wavered, steady only in his rage. Then a shout. "Move!" Lieutenant Camilla Reyes, assigned to security, broke from the line of officers. She sprinted a short distance through the fog, boots pounding. In one motion, she slammed her elbow into Cole's wrist, wrenching the weapon free. It clattered onto the stone walkway, sliding to a stop beside a headstone marked "Unknown Soldier." Cole staggered back, clutching his hand. You don't know who she is," he shouted. Reyes's voice was firm. "I know exactly who she is." Two military guards rushed forward, pinning Cole to the ground. His radio screamed static as his knees hit the gravel. Maya still knelt, her eyes on the gun, lying near the stone. She did not move, did not cry, did not flinch. She was back in Baghdad, the mortar siren screaming, the sky burning orange in her mind. She was kneeling beside another soldier's body, hearing her own voice shouting orders over the chaos. "Stay with me, Julian. Stay with me." Isabel ran to her side. "Maya, look at me. Look at me." But Maya did not respond. Her hands rested on her head, fingers trembling in her white gloves. The sound of the ocean filled the silence again. When Cole was dragged away, he twisted his neck, blood on his lip. "You can't hide behind those stars forever," he yelled, voice cracking. Victor knelt beside Maya. "It's over," he said softly. She blinked, as if waking from a long, terrible dream. "No," she whispered. "It's just beginning." Around them, The fog began to lift, revealing neat white rows of gravestones stretching toward the edge of the world. The camera on Mateo's phone kept streaming, capturing her silhouette, a 4-star general on her knees beside her son's casket, a gun at rest beside a fallen soldier's grave. It would be the image that broke a nation's silence. The video was already everywhere before the police could react. A shaky frame, a voice yelling, "He's got a gun on her. He's pointing it at the general." Within the hour, it had crossed platforms and newsrooms, millions of views, comments poured in by the thousands. Veterans, mothers, soldiers, and strangers demanding answers. The hashtag #GunOnStars trended worldwide. But inside the temporary command tent near the bluff, none of that mattered yet. The air smelled of salt, sweat, and gunpowder. General Maya Rivera sat silently at the folding table, her uniform still perfect, though her hands trembled in her lap. Across from her, her sister Isabel poured water into a paper cup, voice unsteady. "You need to drink, Maya. You're shaking." Maya did not answer. Her eyes stayed fixed on the edge of the cup, watching the water ripple as if any movement might shatter her. She could still hear the echo of the gunshot, still feel the dirt press against her knees. Outside, Major Victor Lang argued with a police sergeant who had arrived with a clipboard and no apology. "You're not detaining her," Victor said sharply. "She's the victim." "We just need statements, sir," the sergeant replied, though his tone betrayed irritation. "We have a lot of confusion out there." "Confusion?" Victor snapped. "You had one of your own officers pull a gun on a 4-star general during a military funeral. That's not confusion. That's criminal." By midday, the tent had filled with investigators, photographers, and whispered orders. The flag over Julian's coffin hung limp in the damp wind. The burial had been halted. Protocol dictated investigation. Maya's expression did not change when an officer told her they would have to hold the scene. Isabel's voice cracked. "She just lost her son. How much more do you need to hold?" Maya finally spoke, her tone measured but hollow. "Let them do what they have to do, Isabel. We've both worn the uniform long enough to know how this works." That was when Victor stepped back into the tent, his face full. He waited until the officer stepped outside, then spoke quietly. "Maya, there's something I need to tell you. It's about Cole." Her eyes lifted. "Go on. I should have said it years earlier. He was yours, your soldier, back in Baghdad. You remember the tribunal?" Her breath caught. "You mean the racial slur incident?" He nodded slowly. "You filed the report that got him discharged. I knew he blamed you. I knew he was drinking. I should have said something when I heard he'd joined the San Diego PD, but I told myself it wasn't my fight anymore." His voice broke. I stayed silent. For the first time, Maya's composure cracked. You stayed silent while he carried a badge. Victor bowed his head. I thought he'd changed. I was wrong. Isabel stepped closer, resting a hand on Maya's shoulder. You did what was right, and he couldn't live with it. That's on him, not you. But Maya was not listening. She was staring through the tent flap, watching the officers string yellow tape around the area where she'd knelt. Her son's coffin was still there, untouched, waiting for the ceremony that never finished. The chaplain stood a few yards away, head bowed, murmuring prayers over the wind. By midday, the police department had already started its defense. Their first public statement called the event a misunderstanding during a security concern. They labeled Mateo Santos, the young veteran who had live-streamed the scene, a known agitator associated with disruptive online activism. When Mateo read the statement from his phone inside his car, he laughed bitterly. Agitator, I filmed what happened. You can see it clear as day. He opened his phone again, checked the viewer count, now in the millions, and whispered, "They can't bury this." At that moment, reporters were already gathering outside the base gates. A camera crew caught sight of Maya as she exited the tent. The image of her walking past the press, upright, silent, medals glinting against the fog, became the photograph on every front page the next morning. Hours passed before the funeral resumed. The crowd had thinned to family, officers, and soldiers who refused to leave. The military chaplain approached her gently. "General, would you like to proceed?" Maya nodded once. "Let's finish it." The burial resumed later that day, long after the sun had burned through the fog. There were no speeches this time, no anthem, no rifle volley. The usual ceremony had been stripped bare, leaving only silence and the sound of shovels pressing into damp earth. Isabel held Maya's hand. The flag was folded slowly and handed to her. Maya accepted it without words, eyes distant. Victor stood behind her, cap in hand, tears streaking the wrinkles on his cheeks. Camila Reyes, her uniform jacket removed, sleeves rolled to her elbows, stood at attention, silent as the wind. When the final notes of taps echoed through the field, Maya knelt beside the grave. The world seemed to fade until it was only her and the folded triangle of cloth in her arms. She placed her hand on the casket, fingers tracing the edge of the wood. Her whisper was barely audible. Yet the few who stood near her would never forget it. "Your death will not be in vain, Julian. Not this time. Not ever again." The camera from Mateo's phone caught that moment too. It was not live. He had turned it off out of respect. But later that evening, when the recording was uploaded again, those quiet words closed the video like a prayer over a burning city. That night, Maya sat in her sister's kitchen on Coronado Island, still in uniform. The folded flag rested on the counter beside her untouched tea. On the muted television, anchors debated police protocol, military jurisdiction, and potential miscommunication. The words rolled like noise from another planet. Victor called to check on her. "You should get some rest," he said. "I can't. I'll stop by in the morning." "Don't," she said softly. "You did enough today." He hesitated. "Maya, I'm sorry." She did not respond. She hung up quietly and turned off the phone. Outside the window, lights from the naval base shimmered across the water. Somewhere in the dark, the city that had once saluted her now argued about her on every screen. She pressed her hand to the folded flag and whispered again, "You changed the way I saw the world, Julian. Now, I'll change it back for you." Down the coast, protesters were already gathering in Balboa Park, candles in hand. A voice on a megaphone read her quote aloud from the video, word for word, until the chant rose through the streets. "Your death will not be in vain." By midnight, the phrase had reached every corner of the internet. By dawn, the whole country would know her name. Within a day, it had reached tens of millions. By dawn the next day, the world had already chosen its side. Screens glowed from living rooms to airports, replaying the sum frame. Officer Cole, with his gun raised, and General Maya Rivera kneeling before her son's coffin. News anchors called it the most disgraceful act in modern policing. Veterans groups called it treason. And somewhere in Washington, Senator Vivian Hale was drafting a statement that would turn outrage into law. That morning, her words appeared on every major feed. A 4-star general held at gunpoint over her son's coffin. "This is not an incident. It is a crime." By midday, the words were a chant echoing through downtown San Diego. Thousands flooded the streets between the Gas Lamp District and Balboa Park. Most were veterans, some still in partial uniform, carrying signs that read, "She served," and "Justice for Julian." Others were ordinary citizens who had seen enough. Helicopters circled overhead, their rotors chopping the fog into shreds. Police lines formed quickly. Riot shields, batons, orders shouted over loudspeakers. The sound of drums began somewhere near Fifth Avenue, and within minutes the march turned into a roar. "Gun on stars! Gun on stars!" they shouted, the chant pulsing like thunder through the city blocks. Maya watched it unfold from her sister's living room window. She had not slept. The folded flag still rested on the coffee table, untouched since the burial. The television volume was low, yet she could still hear the tremor in the anchor's voice. "Sources confirm Officer Cole has been suspended pending investigation. The department has issued a statement calling the incident regrettable but complicated." Isabel turned off the set in disgust. "Regrettable? They nearly shot you in front of his grave." Maya did not answer. She only whispered, "They'll rewrite it until it hurts less to look at." Meanwhile, in the downtown holding facility, Cole sat in a gray interrogation room, wrists chained to the table. The room smelled of disinfectant and stale air. He stared at the mirror on the wall, aware someone was behind it, when the door opened. Major Victor Lang stepped in, uniform pressed, eyes hard. "Years earlier, Harlan," he said quietly, "you had years to move on." Cole looked up, unshaven and defiant. "Move on? From what she did? She took my rank, my life, my pension. For what? A joke?" "It wasn't a joke," Victor said. "You called your own squad mate a monkey." Cole leaned forward, chain clinking. "You people ruin everything you touch. She wanted me humiliated, and she got it. I was supposed to protect this country, not bow to her." Victor exhaled through his nose. "Steady. You should think about who you're calling her now. The country you swore to protect watched you aim a gun at a mother burying her son." The guard knocked on the door, signaling time. Victor turned to leave, then paused. "You could have walked away, Harlan, but hate doesn't walk. It circles back." He left without looking back, and the camera in the corner recorded Cole's empty stare. That evening, news networks uncovered his history. Multiple prior complaints, several suspensions, and settled lawsuits, none of them leading to termination. In one case, he had pointed his gun at a black reservist during a traffic stop years earlier. The report had been buried under administrative discretion. Now, those files were plastered across the internet, screenshots circulating faster than the department could delete them. For every sanitized statement the city released, a new document leaked to prove the opposite. At the same time, Maya began to receive messages, hundreds of them, through official channels, social media, and even handwritten letters. Some offered comfort, others dripped with venom. "You disgraced the flag," one read. Another simply said, "You should have stayed in Iraq." Isabel begged her not to read them, but Maya read every line. "Let them speak," she said quietly. "They're showing the sickness we still refuse to treat." That night, a black sedan idled outside her house. Inside sat an envelope taped to the windshield. No stamp, no name, just 2 words typed in bold. "You'll pay." Isabel found it first and gasped. Maya took it from her hand, examined the paper, then folded it neatly. "File it," she said. "Don't tell the media." When Isabel protested, Maya's tone hardened. "If they want to frighten me, they'll have to do better than paper." In the city, the protests grew louder. National Guard units stood ready, though uncalled. A few blocks from the courthouse, Mateo Santos, the young veteran whose live stream had started it all, climbed onto the steps with a megaphone. He was not an orator, but the crowd quieted when he spoke. "I was there," he said. "I filmed it, and I'll tell you what I saw. I saw a man aim his gun at honor itself. Don't let them call it confusion. Call it what it is." The chant rose again, echoing between glass towers. The police held their line, but for once they did not advance. Inside the federal building, agents from the Department of Justice met behind closed doors. The acting director of civil rights read from a folder marked "Immediate Review." "Multiple complaints, internal witnesses, and video confirmation," she said. "This isn't just misconduct. This is premeditated bias with a prior connection to the victim." A staff attorney whispered, "We have enough for federal jurisdiction." The director nodded. "Then we proceed." Across the bay, Maya stood on the porch of her home on Coronado, watching the flashes of police lights across the bridge. Her body ached from exhaustion, but her mind would not rest. She thought of Julian at 15, standing in their driveway in a borrowed uniform, saluting her before she deployed. "Mom, I'm going to make you proud." He had kept his word. The world would now see his name alongside hers, though not the way she ever wanted. Victor called again that night. "You should know," he said quietly. "They've charged him with aggravated assault, but I think the feds are stepping in." "Good," Maya replied. "Let them see what's inside the uniform." He hesitated. "There's something else. The department's already leaking that you provoked him. They're saying you reached for something." Maya laughed, low and bitter. "Reaching for my folded flag? Maybe." When the call ended, she stood in the doorway and listened to the surf against the rocks. The Pacific sounded exactly like Baghdad in the distance. Constant, unrelenting. She whispered to the dark, "Julian, they're coming for the truth now." By the next morning, San Diego was a city divided. One side marched with candles, the other with shields. Veterans from across the country began to arrive, some flying banners, others carrying photographs of lost friends. On the courthouse steps, Senator Vivian Hale held a press conference calling for a national review of bias in local policing. "If a decorated general can be treated this way," she said, "then the rank of every citizen is in danger." Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. Her staff whispered that the governor had just called for an emergency session on the long-stalled mandatory bias training bill. That night, the city glowed with candlelight instead of gunfire. But beneath the calm, a darker current stirred. Inside his cell, Cole scrawled a note on lined paper, his handwriting jagged and uneven. "You'll pay, General." He folded it once, twice, and slid it toward the guard. "Get this delivered," he said. The guard did not respond, but the camera above recorded every second. Across town, Maya sat alone with the folded flag in her lap. The television muted again, the same footage looping silently. She looked at her reflection in the screen, the same stars gleaming faintly under the lamplight, and whispered to herself, "It's not over yet." And she was right. The fog that once hid the cliffs had lifted, but a deeper storm had only just begun to form. The weeks that followed turned every secret into evidence, multiple prior complaints, several suspensions buried in paperwork, one incident years earlier, where Officer Harlan Cole had pulled a gun on a Black Army reservist and called it a traffic misunderstanding. Each file arrived in Maya's inbox from quiet allies inside the Department of Justice, officers tired of pretending not to see. She read every line in silence, her pen tapping against the table, her grief slowly turning into purpose. What began as one man's rage was revealing an entire chain of negligence stretching back years. And at the center was a truth she had not expected. Cole had never stopped watching her. Federal investigators traced his online history. There it was, years of obsession. Her posts about veterans advocacy, her speeches, her photos with Julian, even a comment she had made about rebuilding trust between communities and police. All of it archived, screenshotted, and annotated in a private folder on his computer. He had followed her promotions, mocked her on private message boards, and posted under aliases about traitors in uniform. When the agents told her, she did not flinch. She only asked how many others saw it and said nothing. At the same time, the San Diego Police Department released a carefully edited statement and a still frame from the incident. They claimed she had acted suspiciously, that she might have reached toward a concealed object. The frame they used showed her hands mid-motion, blurred by fog. They cropped out the casket. They called it a security response. Within hours, news anchors repeated the phrase, "acted suspiciously," and Maya knew what came next, the slow erosion of truth through repetition. It had happened to soldiers, to civilians, to anyone who did not fit the script. Victor drove to her home that night, anger written across his face. "They're rewriting the day, Maya," he said. "I can't stand it." She looked up from her files. "Let them write. We'll answer with facts." She opened a folder labeled Internal Affairs, Confidential. Inside were complaint summaries, each stamped "resolved" without signature. Every complaint closed by the same supervisor. She said, "Captain Leary. He retired last year with full pension. Now he consults for the city." Victor's jaw tightened. So the cover-up started long before the funeral. Maya nodded. Systemic silence always does. The next morning, Maya met with federal prosecutors at the courthouse. She was no longer just a victim. She was a witness. The agents briefed her on what they had discovered. Doctored police body cam footage, deleted radio transmissions, and messages between Cole and a small online group called Sentinels of Honor, a forum for ex-officers who believed the military had been corrupted by diversity. Cole had posted there the night before the funeral. "Tomorrow I face my demon in uniform." The timestamp matched exactly 1 hour before the service began. "Premeditation," one of the prosecutors said. "Clear motive, bias, and prior threat. This isn't just assault. It's domestic terrorism under color of law." Maya exhaled slowly. "Then prove it." But when she stepped outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, microphones thrust forward. "General Rivera, is it true the officer was one of your former soldiers? Are you pressing for the death penalty?" She kept her tone calm. "This is not vengeance," she said. "This is accountability. Justice is not a weapon. It's a mirror." The clip ran on every major network that night, cutting through political noise like clean air through smoke. Despite the public fury, the department still tried to discredit her. Anonymous posts claimed she had exaggerated her PTSD, citing unnamed sources. Others accused her of staging the event for publicity. Isabel threw her phone across the kitchen in disgust. "They're trying to break you." Maya shook her head. "They can't. I've already been broken once." She poured herself tea and watched the steam rise, slow and calm, as if discipline itself were armor. The breakthrough came weeks later. A junior investigator from Internal Affairs reached out anonymously with a flash drive. Inside were copies of original body cam logs, unedited. They revealed the truth. No sudden movement from Maya, no threat, no cause. The footage showed Cole raising his gun without warning, his voice trembling with anger. And then, just before he fired into the air, a whisper. "Say my name now, General." That single phrase changed everything. Intent replaced confusion. The city's narrative collapsed overnight. Maya watched the video in her living room with Victor and Camila Reyes beside her. When it ended, no one spoke. Finally, Camila said softly, "He wanted to humiliate you in public, not kill you. That's why he fired up." Maya nodded. "It's still the same bullet of hate. He just missed the heart." That evening, she attended her first PTSD support meeting at the VA Center in La Jolla. She sat among younger veterans, listening more than speaking. One Marine shared how he still woke to phantom explosions. Another admitted he avoided funerals because the sound of a bugle made his hands shake. When it was Maya's turn, she hesitated, then said quietly, "Sometimes the enemy wears your country's uniform. That's harder to heal than any wound." The room fell silent. A young woman reached out and touched her hand. For the first time in months, Maya felt something shift, grief becoming resolve. Days later, a letter arrived at her mailbox, handwritten in uneven strokes. No envelope, just folded paper damp from sweat. The return address was the county detention facility. Inside were 6 words. No regrets. You deserved it. Below that, a signature. D. Cole. Isabel wanted to destroy it, but Maya slipped it into a plastic sleeve. Evidence, she said simply. It was proof of intent, proof of the sickness she had spent her life trying to confront. By mid-autumn, federal charges were filed. Civil rights violation, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, and premeditated hate crime. Cole's mugshot stared from every front page. He looked smaller now, eyes sunken, uniform stripped of authority. Maya did not celebrate. She knew trials were wars of endurance, not emotion. Her focus was the next step, testimony. She rehearsed her statement nightly, not from pride, but precision. Each word would have weight. Each pause would matter. In private moments, she still spoke to Julian. At his grave, she would sit on the low stone bench, the ocean wind tugging at her hair. "I'm still standing, son," she would whisper. "I can almost hear you laughing, telling me to fight smarter, not harder." The sky above the military cemetery on the bluff turned gold in late autumn sunsets, the sea reflecting it like metal polished by time. She would sit until the horizon faded, then rise, straighten her jacket, and walk away with that quiet soldier's discipline that had carried her through every battle. Behind her, the world was preparing for another one, the trial that would decide whether the badge still outranked conscience, whether the country could look at itself in the mirror and not look away. And as Maya returned home that night, a calm certainty settled over her. The fog that once hid the truth had lifted, and this time she would not let anyone rewrite what happened on that cliff above the sea. The trial began on a gray November morning in the U.S. District Court of San Diego. Courtroom 4C. Outside, hundreds of veterans stood shoulder to shoulder, flags folded against their chests, rain misting across their caps. Inside, the air was still and cold, thick with anticipation. The gallery overflowed. Reporters, veterans, and a silence so taut it felt alive. When the judge entered, all rose, even General Maya Rivera, whose 4 stars now shone like defiance itself. Months had passed since the cemetery. The world had watched her humiliation, her grief, and her restraint. Now it would watch justice measured in words, not weapons. The prosecution opened with the video. The courtroom lights dimmed, and the screen flickered to life. There it was again. The fog, the casket, the gun, the shout, the sound of the warning shot rolled through the chamber, making some jurors flinch. You could hear children scream in the background, a woman crying, and then the distinct clatter of the pistol hitting the stone. The clip ended on the frame of Maya kneeling beside her son's coffin, hands on her head, eyes lifted to the sky. The prosecutor turned slowly toward the jury. "That," he said quietly, "is not confusion. That is hatred wearing a badge." The defense tried to soften the blow, claiming emotional stress, poor judgment, confusion in the fog. They painted Cole as a broken man, once a decorated soldier who lost his way. But when the evidence came, body cam audio, internal reports, and his own online messages, each excuse fell apart like paper in rain. Then came the witnesses. First was Lieutenant Camila Reyes. She stood straight, hands clasped, voice unwavering. "I was a short distance away," she said. "He aimed, he shouted, he pulled the trigger. I disarmed him because I believed he would fire again." The defense pressed her on whether she was sure of his intent. "Intent," she repeated. "He called her by name before he drew the gun. That's intent." Next came Major Victor Lang. The courtroom stilled when he took the stand, his limp more pronounced now, his medals heavy on his chest. "Years earlier, I saw him call another soldier an animal," Victor said. "Maya filed the report that ended his career. I thought it was over. I was wrong." His voice broke slightly. "I stayed silent too long. Today I speak." When the prosecutor asked what kind of soldier Maya had been, he answered simply, "The kind who carried others out before herself." Throughout the testimonies, Maya sat quietly at the front table. She did not flinch when her name was said, nor when the defense tried to drag her record into doubt. When the judge finally called her to the stand, the room leaned forward as one. She stood, adjusted her uniform, and swore the oath with steady hands. The prosecutor began softly. "General Rivera, what went through your mind when Officer Cole aimed his weapon?" Maya's eyes did not waver. "I thought of my son," she said. "I thought of the wars I survived, the men and women I buried, and how none of it had prepared me for a gun aimed at my heart on American soil. And why didn't you resist? Because I've spent my life teaching soldiers that discipline saves lives. I wasn't about to betray that lesson, even to save my own." The defense attorney rose next, eager for doubt. "General, isn't it true you once reprimanded Officer Cole years earlier?" "Yes. And you cost him his career?" "I didn't cost him anything. His actions did." The lawyer paced. Would you say he had reason to resent you? Maya met his eyes calmly. Resentment is not a defense for hatred. If it were, this courtroom would be empty. The gallery murmured softly before the judge rapped his gavel for silence. The cross-examination stumbled after that. The final blow came when prosecutors revealed a notebook taken from Cole's home. A leather-bound journal containing angry scrawls, phrases like, "She took my life, I'll take hers," and a drawing of 4 stars marked with bullet holes. The defense's last hope dissolved when the judge gave him a chance to speak. Cole stood, shackles clinking. His voice was hoarse, but loud enough to fill the room. "You want to know why I did it," he said. "Because she made me kneel once, years earlier, in front of my unit. She stripped me of my rank and told me I dishonored the uniform. I wanted her on her knees like I once knelt before her." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Maya did not move. The judge's face hardened. "You just admitted motive," he said quietly. The prosecutor turned to the jury, voice steady. "He didn't lose control. He planned control. He wanted domination, not justice. That's not law enforcement. That's vengeance." After a recess, Maya returned to the stand for her final statement. The courtroom fell silent. Her voice carried like steel wrapped in sorrow. "I don't want revenge," she said. "I want this nation to look in the mirror, to ask itself what kind of justice allows a decorated officer to be treated as a threat because of her skin. I wore this uniform to protect America. Now I stand here asking America to protect its own soul." When she finished, even the judge paused before speaking. "General Rivera," he said quietly, "this court thanks you for your service and your courage." The jury deliberated for several hours. When they returned, every face was solemn. The foreperson, a middle-aged Navy veteran, stood. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Harlan Cole, guilty on all counts." The courtroom erupted, some in applause, others in tears. Reporters rushed out to file their stories. Veterans saluted silently from the gallery. Cole stood motionless as the judge read the sentence. Life without parole. His shoulders sagged, eyes blank, as if realizing that every moment of hate had brought him to this one. When the bailiff moved to escort him away, he turned toward Maya, lips trembling. "You win," he muttered. She shook her head. "No one wins here." He stumbled as they led him out, shackles clattering against the tile. The door closed behind him, and the courtroom fell quiet again. Outside, the crowd cheered as Maya stepped onto the courthouse steps, the Pacific wind catching her uniform. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions she did not answer. She looked out at the sea of faces, Veterans saluting, mothers holding flags, young cadets standing in awe. She raised her hand, not in victory, but in acknowledgement. A salute for those who had stood with her, for those who had watched the world shift one step closer to justice for the first time since Julian's death. She let a tear fall. It was not grief anymore. It was release. The kind that comes when truth finally speaks louder than fear. The trial's verdict echoed across the nation, but its real weight settled slowly, rippling outward from San Diego like a quiet tide. Officer Harlan Cole was sentenced to life without parole. Cameras captured his hollow stare as deputies led him away, his wrists chained. The same hands that once held power, now cuffed in shame. That image, his bowed head beside a stoic General Maya Rivera, ran across every headline the next morning. Justice for Julian. But justice, Maya knew, was not a single moment in court. It was the long silence that followed, when everyone else went home and she had to face the pieces of what hate had left behind. Cole's world unraveled almost immediately. His wife filed for divorce days after sentencing, citing irreparable moral collapse, then vanished from the public eye. His son stood before a microphone at a college press conference and said quietly, "I love my father, but I don't know the man who pointed that gun." Within a month, the son changed his last name to his mother's. In prison, Cole's body began to fail him. Years of drinking had eaten through his liver. He attempted suicide once, leaving behind a single note scrawled on a legal pad. "I just wanted to be heard." He survived the attempt, but not the illness. Months into his sentence, he died quietly in a hospital ward of the state penitentiary, unvisited, unclaimed. When the news reached Maya, she did not celebrate, did not flinch. She only said, "Another life wasted by the disease we refuse to name." She refused interviews, declined speaking offers, and spent her days in near solitude on Coronado Island, running along the same stretch of beach where she used to walk with Julian as a boy. People left flowers outside her gate, letters from veterans and widows, even folded flags. She read each note in the evening, her lamp casting a warm glow on the medals beside her. The country had moved on to its next outrage, but Maya was building something lasting. From that quiet came the Rivera Foundation. It began with one idea written in the margin of her notebook: honor through equity. Within weeks, she turned that line into a mission to provide mental health support, mentorship, and legal aid for veterans of color facing discrimination in civilian life. The Foundation's first office opened in downtown San Diego, across from the courthouse where she had testified. The building had once been a bank, its marble floors now lined with photographs of service members who had faced bias and fought back. She named one room after Julian. On its door hung his bronze star and a small plaque that read, "Courage doesn't die, it transforms." The state legislature took notice. The new Accountability Act, inspired by her stand, passed with a rare bipartisan vote. The measure required all California law enforcement officers to complete extensive annual anti-bias and psychological accountability training. The footage from the bluff spoke louder than any argument. By spring, the governor signed it into law, his hand trembling slightly as he handed the pen to Maya. "For every uniform," he said, "to remind us what they truly mean." She did not smile, only nodded. "Then make sure it's enforced," she replied. Mateo Santos, the young veteran whose live stream had captured the world's attention, visited her office one afternoon. He was thinner now, sleepless from the demands of a sudden new role as activist and truth-teller. "I never meant to be famous," he told her. "I just couldn't let it happen unseen." Maya placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then don't stop," she said. He did not. That year, he launched the Gun on Stars podcast, a weekly program interviewing veterans and police reform advocates. Within months, it reached millions of listeners across platforms. His first guest was Maya herself, her voice calm and steady through the microphone. "Forgiveness," she said, "isn't surrender. It's the final act of control." In the background of that progress, the ripple of reform spread beyond California. Several states announced plans to mirror the new accountability law. Military bases requested her to speak about racial dynamics in uniform. She accepted only one invitation: Fort Hood, the base where she had once disciplined Cole. When she stood before the soldiers there, she spoke without notes. "The uniform gives you authority," she said, "but it also demands humility. You don't earn respect by the weapon you carry, but by the lives you protect with it." When she finished, no one applauded right away. They simply stood in silence, saluting as one. Meanwhile, Victor Lang's health was fading. The strain of the trial, the guilt, and years of injury had caught up to him. One night, he called Maya from a hospital bed. "You did it," he said softly. "You made something good out of the worst." She answered quietly, "We did it." A few weeks later, he passed away in his sleep. She attended his small memorial in uniform, placed her hand on his casket, and whispered, "Rest easy, soldier. You kept your promise at last." Back in San Diego, the protests had long ended, but their memory lingered in murals and photographs. One painting on the side of a veterans center showed Maya kneeling by her son's grave with the words, "Honor lives here," beneath it. Tourists stopped to take pictures, though Maya never visited it herself. She did not need to. Her memory of that day was clearer than any painting could capture. On the anniversary of Julian's death, she returned to the military cemetery on the bluff. The sky was clear, the ocean calm, gulls tracing lazy circles over the water. She carried a bouquet of sunflowers, his favorite, and placed them beneath the headstone. Her hand lingered on the carved name, Sergeant Julian Rivera. She whispered, "You changed the world, son." A few feet away, a small crowd gathered, veterans, reporters, and members of her foundation. They waited respectfully, unsure if she would speak. After a long silence, Maya turned toward them. "The day he died, I thought my purpose ended," she said. "Now I know it began there. Hate didn't win that day. It exposed itself. And when the world saw it, it had to choose." Her words spread across media within hours. Networks called it the Sunflower Speech. It became a message of resilience quoted by leaders, teachers, and soldiers alike. Donations to the Rivera Foundation tripled within a week. That night, Maya returned home, opened the balcony door, and watched the city lights shimmer across the bay. Somewhere out there, young recruits were studying the new accountability law as part of their training. Somewhere, a veteran was listening to Mateo's latest podcast episode about courage under pressure. Somewhere, a widow found comfort knowing she was not alone. Maya sat quietly, sipping tea, her reflection faint in the glass. The world had changed, but not enough. It never changed enough. Yet, for the first time since that foggy morning on the bluff, she allowed herself to breathe without flinching. The folded flag still rested on the mantel beside Julian's bronze star. She looked at it, her voice low. "You were right, son. Standing tall isn't about medals. It's about meaning." Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the sound of waves against the shore, the same rhythm that once framed her pain. Now it was different, steady, patient, eternal. She rose, closed the balcony door, and whispered to the empty room, "Rest, Julian. The fight's in good hands now." In the months after the trial, America was still talking about her. Editorials called her the conscience in uniform. Universities quoted her congressional testimony in ethics lectures. Across many states, legislators drafted their own versions of the accountability law, using her name as shorthand for reform. But for General Maya Rivera, fame had never been the goal. Her days began the same way they always had. Before dawn, tea steaming on the table, the folded flag still resting on the mantel. She would look out toward the Pacific and think of Julian. The pain no longer burned. It lingered like a scar, quiet but permanent. The world had changed because of what happened on that foggy bluff, and now, for the first time, she could see what the change had cost. Winter morning, she stood before Congress beneath a dome of cameras and lights. Her posture was steady, her voice low but clear. If a 4-star general can be held at gunpoint over her son's coffin, she began, then no one, no teacher, no worker, no child is safe from bias in a badge. The room fell silent. Members who had argued endlessly over lesser issues leaned forward, caught between shame and awe. She spoke for 15 minutes without notes, each line measured like a cadence march. "I came here not as a soldier," she said, "but as a mother. My son fought for a country that sometimes forgets its own soldiers look like him. I ask you not for pity, but for partnership." When she finished, the audience rose in a standing ovation that lasted nearly a minute. Cameras captured her face, not proud, not triumphant, simply resolute. That testimony traveled farther than she could imagine. Within months, many states passed laws modeled after the new accountability measure, mandating yearly training in bias recognition, accountability audits, and public access to officer disciplinary records. Federal agencies adopted similar standards. The Department of Defense announced new oversight programs to prevent racial disparity within its own ranks. For once, change did not feel like a headline. It felt like motion. Mateo broadcast her speech live on his podcast. In his closing reflection, he said, "The same woman they tried to silence at a cemetery is now writing the next chapter of justice." His words reached millions, and the clip became one of the defining moments of the year. Donations to the Rivera Foundation surged again, funding clinics for veterans of color in several states, each center displaying the same quote over its doorway. "Truth doesn't heal the wound. It teaches us not to inflict it again." Maya's schedule grew heavier. Panels, conferences, late-night interviews, but she carried it with quiet discipline. She refused luxury travel, stayed in modest hotels, and always brought a framed photo of Julian to every event. Reporters often asked what kept her moving. She would answer softly, "Grief with a purpose doesn't weigh as much." Yet in private, she carried the fatigue of someone who had spent too long standing at attention. One spring morning, she returned to the military cemetery on the bluff for the first time in months. The fog was thinner now, the grass brighter. Rows of white headstones stretched toward the sea, perfectly aligned like silent soldiers. She walked slowly to Julian's grave, her hand brushing the cool marble. "It's quieter now," she whispered. "The world's listening. Just a little." She placed new sunflowers, the petals bright against the stone, then sat on the bench nearby. The ocean below was calm, the wind soft enough to carry voices, if heaven allowed. Behind her, a few tourists passed quietly. One older man recognized her, removed his cap, and saluted from a distance. She returned the gesture with a faint nod. The moment was simple, human. No cameras, no speeches, just two people who understood the cost of service. Later that evening, she met with a group of young cadets at the Naval Academy in Coronado. They asked what courage meant to her now. Maya paused before answering. "Courage," she said, "isn't standing tall when the world salutes you. It's standing tall when it points a gun at you." The room was silent except for the faint hum of the overhead lights. Then one cadet stood and saluted her, followed by another, until the entire room was standing. She felt the lump rise in her throat, but kept her composure. Her story became a case study in leadership ethics. Documentaries aired across public television, and her image, kneeling before the coffin, the gun frozen inches away, became one of the century's defining photographs. Scholars compared it to moments that changed public conscience. Maya never embraced those comparisons. "I didn't start a movement," she told a journalist. "I just refused to kneel for the wrong reason." On the anniversary of the incident, Congress held a ceremony recognizing the national adoption of the accountability reforms. Senator Vivian Hale presented her with a plaque engraved with the words, "Service beyond service." Maya accepted it, then turned toward the cameras. "If we're celebrating anything," she said, "let it be that our nation still has the courage to correct itself." That night, she drove alone back to the military cemetery on the bluff. The road was quiet, the air cool. She parked near the gate, walked through the dark rows until she reached Julian's stone. Moonlight shimmered on the ocean below, casting silver lines across the grass. She sat again, folded her hands, and spoke solely. "You did it, Julian. You made them see." Her eyes glistened, but her voice did not tremble. "Every soldier fights one war in uniform, another after they take it off. I've finished mine. Now I'll rest." From the ridge, the wind carried the faint sound of waves breaking, like distant applause. She smiled faintly. The pain had dulled. The mission complete. In the morning, she would return to Washington for a new hearing, this time to advise on veterans reform. She would testify again, wearing the same uniform, the sole stars. The world would listen again, not out of shock, but out of respect. As the first light touched the horizon, Maya stood, straightened her jacket, and gave a final salute to the grave before her. She turned toward the rising sun, her silhouette framed against the ocean, strong and solitary. Behind her lay the stone rose of sacrifice. Before her, a nation still learning how to honor them. The wind brushed her face as if Julian himself were saying goodbye. And as she walked back toward the gate, her voice carried softly into the dawn. Silence shields injustice. Truth demands a voice. Speak for Julian, for all of us. Those words became her final public message. Etched later onto a bronze memorial near the cemetery's entrance, visitors read it as they entered, pausing before the ocean of graves that stretched toward the horizon. Some whispered prayers. Others simply stood still, feeling the weight of what justice costs and what courage restores. That morning, the sun broke clean over the Pacific, the sky a quiet gold. For the first time in years, the barrel no longer pointed at the stars. It reflected them. Thank you for standing with stories that remind us courage is not noise, but quiet truth. Your support keeps these voices alive. If this story moved you, share it, subscribe, and help more people hear the call for justice and humanity. Every view, every share, every voice matters.